performance gains. That's the growth. When I launch a new query, by default, this will always go to 1, student performance summary, and I want to go to 11, student performance gains. I'm going to choose reading. I want all years. And then I'm going to leave, no I'm not. That's what I'm going to change. I'm going to change the primary proficiency, and I'm going to change this to 4 levels. Actually, I can even leave that primary proficiency, I believe. Hang on. We're going to edit this out. Hang on. Oh, I don't want to do that. Shut your eyes, everybody. I got a lot of editing to do. It was not the goal. Okay, cool. So, what I've just done here is I've selected, there's 2 tiny little graphs here. And on your computer, they're tiny little graphs. One has 2 bars, one has 3. The difference is the 2-bar graph is just going to tell you who's meeting, who's not. Okay? The 3-bar graph is going to tell you however you've divided up that assessment. So like, if we were looking at just focus or support on the ISAT writing rubric, we would have built that in here. We tell the computer what the rubric is, and that would leave us with a 6-bar graph, essentially. Here are the kids who got 1s, kids who got 2s, kids who got 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s. In this case, 4 levels is the exceeds, meets, below standards, academic warning. Okay? And we've associated that with both MAP and with ISAT. Okay? And just for kicks, when I go over here, I'm going to choose ISAT this time instead of MAP. The last data was MAP. This time we'll choose ISAT. So I am now going to do the same thing, but I am going to break this out into even smaller groups than just who met and who didn't meet. And we'll talk about a couple reasons why. There's one big reason. Oh, I need to hit the refresh button. I need to actually hit it. There we go. That was lickety split. And let's go down. So now I'm going to look at this year's 8th graders, let's say. And I want to look at their growth over last school year. So for the base test, I need to go back to when they were 6th graders. Okay? I sat from 6th grade from 2 years ago in May, and it's going to try and be real smart and guess what my target test is, and it has guessed correctly. It guessed, well, if you wanted 6th graders from March of 2009, you probably want their 7th grade reading test from March of 2010. Oh yeah, those are my 8th graders, thank you. So it was smart enough to guess that on its own. Had it not guessed that, I could have just grabbed that pull down and changed it. Okay? I'm going to leave this at 2%, and I again want this to be based on the target test. Okay? Now I'm going to run this query. Before we saw 3 graphs in one, now you're going to see 5 graphs in one. Okay, you're looking at 5 graphs right here. So, the first graph, again, is the orange graph. So, remember, take everything else off except the orange, and you're looking at a graph of last year's 7th graders. So, in June, when we got the ISAT scores, if you'd have come over to my house when I was uploading them and said, hey, how did our 7th graders do in reading on ISATs? And I had just run that graph, the orange graph is all you would have seen. So you would have seen no one under academic warning. You would have seen this chunk of just over 20% on below standards, this chunk about 60% meeting, and this chunk at 18% or whatever on exceeding. Then, remember, each chunk to the right of blue and green represents those kids that are in the orange. So, we can see 100% of the academic warning kids were not improving. We can't even see the academic warning kids on here. So this is like 1 kid or something, and we're not going to worry about that. There's not enough to even be orange there. It's not a group. If that was your school and it came up and you wanted to know who it was, you could see that. Here, among our 20% of kids who were below standards, lots of them, what percentage? 65, 70% of them showed not improving. Now this is ISAT reading. Who are lots of these kids? Lots of them are English language learners. So they probably are improving. Not up to that 2% level though. You know, it's just not, and that's fine. It's an inappropriate assessment for us to be using in that case. When we go over here, look at this story. Our kids who are exceeding are not only exceeding, most of them are continuing to show growth beyond just normal growth. Good news. That's good news. So that means, you know, people saying we're not differentiating for kids, as on the whole, we can say we are. So this kind of graph can be very meaningful probably at the grade level. You can really see, are we doing this? Is this our picture at that grade level? Is this how this looks, and who are our kids? And you'll know about how many English language learners you have. Certainly, this graph is a much different graph when it comes to ISAT, I would imagine. I haven't run them. But for Cooper than it is for Holmes, just because of the percentage of kids for whom the assessment is inappropriate. You know, I wouldn't compare the schools and say, oh, this means this school is better or this school is worse. That's a silly, silly comparison in this case. But I just wanted to show everybody that by changing that one factor, we can break this out into even more detail. And so London, this was in particular for you where you're saying, where we understood one of your questions to be, how are those kids who are meeting and exceeding, how are they really doing? Are we really pushing them to still grow? Now, for all of our buildings, my guess is, given how inappropriate the assessment is for our English language learners, this group is probably made up of kids who are English proficient, right? I mean, if you give me a test in French, no matter how good I am at math or at reading, am I going to be able to be here? Probably not. So this is to answer that question of how are we doing with our kids who are exceeding, are we still challenging them? This might be a relevant piece of this graph to look at, even if none of the rest of the graph is looked at. And you could choose to use this tool in that way. But you can also drill down and see who those kids are in any of these and know who they are. Okay? So now, either way, if you were to generate this graph and give it to teachers, some of the kinds of things that we probably want to be asking teachers, and where they're really going to answer them, are not only when they're looking at the picture, but when they go in and say, who are these kids who are below standards but are growing, and now they can look at their names. Because we want to ask them things like, what are the common factors, team, that you see among these kids? And then why do those common factors exist? So that's their hypothesis, right? That's where they're hypothesizing in the school improvement process. And then, okay, what can you do about that? That's your hypothesis. What can you do to either continue to make that happen like it is in the case of the kids who are improving, or in the case of the kids who aren't showing growth, what can you do differently than what's happening? And that's their action plan. I mean, that's really the action plan question. I think one of the things we can do is develop templates or a way of thinking so that they connect the dots directly. This was something that I thought of after another conversation this week with Janelle. We almost want people to have their hypothesis. So they got their hypothesis, and then they've got their action plan items here, right? And they might have 3 items based on that hypothesis that the team is going to do. There should be a direct line that they should be able to explain. We're going to do this because it addresses the hypothesis in this way. You know, we're going to take these kids out and buy them new shoes because we believe that kids whose feet grow too fast don't improve in reading. Now that may not be a good hypothesis, but we could see that if we're going to be regularly buying them new shoes, that would at least be directly connected to what their hypothesis was.
So that's not a good hypothesis?
Well, it could be if you've got some evidence that it's only the kids whose feet grow fast.
I'll be back in about 10 minutes.
Where do you guys measure all their feet?
You're busy, Jake.
And that must be stinky.
That's why they're men's
You might ask questions, and these are harder to ask for your 6th grade teachers in the middle school because of the nature of the transition from 5th to 6th grade. But when you're looking at these kids and you're seeing their names, and you know who that group is, what's been done before for this group? You might ask that both in the case of a group that is working, like these guys who are showing growth, as well as in the case of a group that's not working. And so that's going to require some dialogue with some other teachers in another grade level. And then we have to use that to say, so we should do action plan items like that or we shouldn't. And if it wasn't working before, does that mean we don't do it again? Probably, but maybe not. Maybe the kids needed more time with it, but we certainly aren't just going to do it if we know it wasn't working. We shouldn't just keep doing that same thing without at least being critical about it. One of the questions you want to ask as they're developing the action plan and looking at the kids is, what are we going to do this time to measure our progress as we're going? And what kind of assessments are we going to be giving these kids as we're moving through the year? And it's got to be doable for teachers, first of all, in scope, and it's got to give them back meaningful information. So they do have to take the time to develop or use quality assessments, because if they're not getting good information about it, was it really worth the time to not only give it to the kids and score it, but then to sit around and talk about it? Probably not. Now, if we thought it was a good assessment and it turned out not to be, that's okay. That's our own growth process as adults in becoming better at doing that. And we certainly need to give ourselves the ability, the luxury to go through that process. And I actually think comments the board made last night continue to be supportive of allowing us to continue to do that. But to just use a bad assessment to say we're using assessments is probably not a good idea. We need to be asking teachers, what do they need to learn to be able to implement their action plan? Now again, that's probably pretty well set at this point by your school improvement teams for this year. But if adjustments can be made going into a grade level, as the middle schools, we've got advantages over the elementary schools in terms of being able to say, we're going to get 6th grade together for 2 hours, I'm going to bring in lunch, we're going to do a little 2-hour workshop with the 6th grade. The elementary schools don't have the same luxury that the middle schools have to be able to pull something like that off as kind of a curveball that wasn't planned back in August by the school improvement team, where we've identified now in October, we really need to learn this, and how are we going to do that? And then one of the questions that both Janelle and Rosemary have said lots of things about is, what foundational skills do the kids need to get at the skills they need here? And then, what's the best way to deliver those foundational skills? Because we can certainly over-glorify the teaching of the foundational skills such that we never get to actually teaching the skills that we were teaching the foundational skills to try to teach. Does that make sense? That was a little like the nonsense comments again from last night, but it made perfect sense to me, so if it didn't, we can go out at some point and talk about it separately. That's how you do it. Those are the kinds of questions that we want people asking. I think like a school like London that's saying coming into today, we think this is what we need. I think literally with 2 to 4 queries, meaning 1 or 2 for math, 1 or 2 for reading, and again, there's some big cautions we need to give because we don't have totally great evidence for all of our kids here. There's some individual teachers, Lori, Elizabeth, Ricky, John, anybody working with our English language learners, anybody working with Tier C kids, they need to think about this a little bit differently. Because right now Apprenda's not in here. I can't just say, look at this, look at Apprenda, look at Spanish ISAT. I mean, how great would it be if we could do that? But we can't do that. Cooper's always going to have a difficult situation when it comes to that on the one hand, because the complexity of all of the different kinds of English language learners at the very least. And then what that means instructionally. On the other hand, in the case of both of those 2 buildings, and this is why I'm saying them first because this is complicated in a different way for you guys, those teachers who we could name at each building who are responsible with the English language learners, some of it doesn't need this. Because like at Cooper, if I'm thinking Tier B kids, and I'm thinking Tier B kids who speak Spanish, Tier B kids who speak Polish, Tier B kids who speak Russian, Tier B kids who are coming from other languages, all of a sudden I've got these little smattering of kids as it is, and so I've got to be thinking, I can be going straight almost to the individual kid, which the whole point of this is to get us to individual kid level stuff, really for all kids. Okay, now,
to get us away from some of those other labels.
Exactly, that's exactly right, and that's why if some initial categorization can help us do that, but that's why this is powerful, because it can get us right to like what Candace said, can we drill down further? Yeah, we can go see everything on that kid. And you, again, play this out another 2 years to where our 6th graders then will be at, with the kind of data we'll have on them. It's pretty amazing. I mean, grades since 3rd grade, all kinds of assessments, so this is